Hey there, and welcome back to Momma Drama and Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel, and if you've been following along, you know every month of this journey has carried its own kind of storm, some heavy, some hopeful, but May 2024, that was the month everything collided. This was supposed to be the month of closure. The month everything was finalized, signed, and over. The month I could finally breathe, but instead it became another month of unraveling. Another reminder that healing isn't a straight line, because May brought more than paperwork and court dates. It brought reflection, disappointment, and moments that forced me to look at everything differently. When everything collided. By the time May rolled around, I was running on fumes, holding everything together for the kids, juggling communication that felt more like confrontation, and trying to convince myself that if I could just get through this month, maybe things would finally settle down. But honestly, a lot of what made May so heavy didn't even start in May. It started a couple months earlier, back in March and April, when my kids met her for the first time. There was no conversation about it, no gentle introduction, no, "How do you feel about this?" No heads up. Just one day, she was there. She was living in the house he had started renting in December, and once the boys met her, she was just there all the time. Every visit, every weekend, every time they went to stay with their dad, she was a part of it. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was immediate, like she'd already been written into the script without anyone asking how the rest of us felt about it. She became a part of their new normal overnight, and my boys didn't like it. Not one bit. They were old enough to understand what was happening, but too young to know how to handle it. They didn't want to make things harder on their dad. They didn't want to hurt his feelings, so they kept quiet around him and brought all their feelings home to me. They'd vent, open up, talk about how awkward it felt, how they didn't even know where to sit sometimes or how to act. They didn't like being there, but they didn't feel like they had a choice. And I'll be honest, it broke my heart. I hated that they felt that way, and I hated that I couldn't fix it. So I did what I always did. I tried to help. I tried to speak up for them, thinking maybe he'd understand if he heard it from me. I'd say things like, "Hey, the boys are feeling a little uncomfortable," or maybe slow things down a bit. They just need some time. But of course, that never went well. He'd twist it into something it wasn't, accuse me of trying to stir things up, or say I was still trying to control his life. And that was never the case. It wasn't about him or her. It was about our kids. But he couldn't, or maybe just wouldn't see that. And I was angry that he didn't stop to think about what all this might feel like for them, angry that he could move someone new into their space without even blinking, while I was still over here trying to pick up the emotional pieces for everyone else. It hadn't even been a year since our marriage fell apart, and already it felt like he was living a whole new life. And somehow I was still the one cleaning up the fallout from his choices. I remember finally saying to him, if she's living there, she needs to pay half of everything until we're divorced. She's living off money that still belongs to both of us. Because that's what it felt like. Another piece of what used to be mine handed away like it didn't matter. Looking back, I wish I'd saved that energy, because arguing with someone who refuses to see beyond themselves is like yelling into a void. He didn't care what it was doing to the kids. He didn't care how much it gutted me to watch it unfold. He didn't care about anyone but himself. And maybe he'd always been that way. Maybe I just never wanted to see it. Or maybe I couldn't. When you love someone that deeply, you fill in all their missing pieces with hope. You tell yourself they'll come around. You make excuses for their indifference. You try to believe that the person you built a life with could never be so careless. But by May, that illusion had completely shattered. I was finally seeing him for who he really was, not who I wanted him to be. Every time I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, there'd be another hit, another stab to the heart, another kick to the gut, and by May, all of it, the frustration, the disappointment, the disbelief, started to pile up until it felt like I was drowning in it. That was the month I started learning what strength really looked like. Not the kind you show on social media, not the kind that pretends everything's fine, but the quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you're exhausted and still get out of bed anyway. The kind that holds your kids together while you're silently falling apart. And I'll never forget the words I wrote in my journal that month. When your person leaves you when you needed them the most, they were never your person. You left me at my weakest. But what you really did was create the strongest version of me, the version that will never need you again. May 2024 was the month everything collided. Parenting, paperwork, pain, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, I started to rebuild my piece from the wreckage. The breakdown of the divorce agreement. By the time May rolled around, I thought I was finally at the finish line. We had spent months working through every detail. Mediation, paperwork, numbers, emotions, all of it. Everything was supposed to be signed and finalized by May 31st. That was the date I was holding on to, my light at the end of the tunnel. I kept thinking, okay, just make it to May. You can do this. By the end of May, you'll finally be free. But just like so many other moments in this process, it didn't go the way it was supposed to. Right before the finish line, he backed out. No real explanation, no apology, no real reason other than he could. When I found out, I just stared at my phone in disbelief. It wasn't shock anymore. It was that quiet kind of exhaustion that sits deep in your bones. The kind where you're not even surprised, just tired. Tired of being disappointed, tired of waiting for someone to do the right thing when they never will. At first, I thought maybe it was about money or pride. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized what it really was. Manipulation. This wasn't about wanting to stay married. It wasn't about dragging his feet because he still cared. Because he didn't. He was fully in his new life with her. He had moved on long ago. What this was another attempt to wear me down, to exhaust me to the point where I'd finally just say, fine, whatever, I'll settle, I'll take less. Just make it stop, because that's what he had always done for years. He had this way of slowly breaking me down, not with big fights or explosions, but with these quiet little battles that chipped away at me one piece at a time. Every argument, every guilt trip, every moment that made me question my worth, it was all part of the same pattern. And this was no different. Backing out of the agreement wasn't about love. It was about leverage. It was about control. It was about reminding me that he still had the ability to make things harder if he wanted to. And the worst part was he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew I was tired. He knew I just wanted it over. He knew I was hanging on by a thread, trying to keep things stable for the kids while also trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of what we had. And he knew if he pushed just enough, maybe I'd finally crack. Maybe I'd finally give in. Maybe I'd finally say, fine, take what you want, I'm done. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't always look like manipulation in the moment. It can look like frustration or confusion or chaos. But it's all designed to do the same thing, to make you question yourself, your strength, your sanity, your ability to keep fighting. And he had done it for years. Wore me down little by little until I stopped arguing, stopped expecting him to show up, stopped believing that my feelings mattered. And for a long time, I didn't even see it for what it was. I just called it keeping the peace. But this time I saw it and I refused to play into it. When he backed out, we had to go back into mediation. Only now with lawyers at the table, more hours, more money, more time, more emotional energy I didn't have left to give. And the irony was, he barely changed anything. It wasn't about the terms, it was about the control. It was about keeping me tangled up in his chaos for as long as possible, because that's what he knew how to do. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night, papers scattered everywhere, calculator on one side, tissues on the other, and I just whispered to myself, how am I still here? How is he still doing this? And that's when it hit me. He wasn't keeping me there. I was. Not because I wanted to be, but because I kept expecting fairness from someone who had never been fair. I kept waiting for closure from someone who was never capable of giving it. And that realization, it broke me and freed me all at once, because in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to let him wear me down again. Not this time, not anymore. I was done being the version of me that gave in to keep the peace. Done shrinking myself to make things easier for him. Done trying to win a game that was never going to be played fairly. So I shifted. I stopped reacting. I stopped letting his silence or his choices dictate how I felt. I stopped waiting for him to do the right thing. And I wrote in my journal that week, you might delay the paperwork, but you can't delay my healing. You might try to wear me down, but this time I see the pattern and I'm not breaking. I'm building. That became my mantra, because by then I finally understood he wasn't trying to stay married. He was trying to win. But I wasn't playing anymore. May was the month I realized that my strength didn't come from fighting back. It came from standing still in my truth and refusing to be moved. He could push, stall, and manipulate all he wanted, but I was no longer that woman who would break just to keep the peace. This time, I chose me. Co-parenting tensions and the birthday weekend. As if May hadn't already been heavy enough, it got worse, because just when I thought I'd seen the extent of how thoughtless things could get, her birthday came around. And that weekend, that was one of those moments that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. He spent the entire weekend celebrating her. Not just a simple dinner, a full-blown, over-the-top birthday experience. Nice restaurant, expensive meal, gifts, drinks, the kind of evening you plan when you're trying to impress someone new. Then the next day, they went all out again. ziplining through trees, riding one of those scenic ski lift style rides that overlook miles of beautiful landscape, then to a winery, then a bar, making it an all-day event. And he paid for all of it with the same money that should have been helping raise our boys. Money that came from sacrifices they and I had already made, weekends missed with him, important school functions he missed because he had to work. 8th grade graduation, parent-teacher meetings, concerts, events that mattered to them but that he couldn't seem to make time for. All those missed moments, all those excuses, and now that same money was being used for an extravagant birthday weekend for her. That's what cut the deepest. It wasn't about jealousy. It was about principle. It was about priorities. It was about seeing him put so much energy and money into someone else while I was still over here trying to keep our kids' lives stable, emotionally and financially. But what really broke me wasn't the money. It was what came after. She went on social media and posted everything. Pictures of them at dinner, pictures of them ziplining, pictures of them kissing on that ski lift ride. And then she tagged him. I wasn't even friends with him anymore. We all had each other blocked, so I would have never seen it on my own. But my kids were friends with him, and they definitely saw it. And that's what made it so cruel. It wasn't thoughtless, it was just blind. They didn't stop for even a second to think about how that would feel for the boys. They didn't think about how confusing, how painful, how uncomfortable that would be to open social media and see their dad's new life being paraded around like a trophy. They didn't think about what it meant to shove that in their faces while they were still trying to process everything that had already happened. It was as if they believed that because they had moved on, everyone else should too. Like healing had a timeline. Theirs. But that's not how healing works. And to make it worse, he never said a word about it. No apology, no awareness, nothing. Just silence. Like it was normal. Like none of it mattered. But it did matter. Because my boys were still in the thick of it, still trying to come to grips with what had happened to our family, still adjusting to the new reality they never asked for. And instead of helping make that easier, they made it harder. That birthday weekend felt like a slap in the face. Not because I missed him, but because of what it said about his priorities. It said, my image matters more than my kids' feelings. It said, I'll keep doing what I want, no matter who gets hurt in the process. And that realization that my children's emotional well-being didn't even cross his mind. That's what broke me. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that Sunday night, tears running down my face, scrolling through those photos people had sent me. Not because I wanted to see them, but because I needed to know what everyone was talking about. And all I could think was, how could you let this happen? How could you be okay with our kids seeing this? That was the moment I realized just how far gone he really was. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone completely different. Someone who no longer saw the line between right and wrong when it came to his own children. It was one of those moments that forced me to grow harder, faster, stronger, because I couldn't protect my kids from his choices anymore. I couldn't keep shielding them from things that shouldn't have been happening in the first place. So instead, I focused on what I could do. I could keep showing up for them. I could be their safe place. I could remind them through my actions what empathy looks like, what love that doesn't hurt feels like. That birthday weekend might have been one of the most hurtful, tone-deaf things they could have done, but it also reminded me exactly who I am and who I will never be, because I will never make my children feel small or unseen in my pursuit of happiness. And I will never forget what it felt like to watch them have to face something so unnecessarily cruel. Letting go of fixing everything. There's this part of me, and honestly, it's always been there, that has tried to fix everything. Keep the peace, hold the family together, make sure everyone's okay. It's something I did for years without even realizing it. If there was tension, I smoothed it over. If there were tears, I was the one trying to comfort, to explain, to make sense of things that didn't make sense. Even when I was hurting, I still tried to make sure everyone else felt safe. That was my role. That was who I was. And I think for the longest time, I believed that was love. That being the one to keep it all together meant I was doing the right thing. But by May, I was starting to see that all it really did was break me down piece by piece. After everything that had happened, the divorce dragging on, the tension, the constant disappointment, I finally started to understand that I couldn't fix this anymore. Not him, not the situation, not even the way the boys felt about it. People started saying things to me that at first I didn't want to hear. Things like, you can't protect them from him. You can't control how he parents. You can't keep explaining him to them. And at first, I pushed back against it because for so long, that's what I had done. I had protected them from the truth in small ways, not lies, but soft landings. I was always the one saying, your dad loves you. He's just busy working. He can't be here because he's providing for us. I thought I was protecting them. I thought I was doing the right thing. But somewhere along the way, I started realizing that what I was really doing was protecting him. I was cushioning the truth so they wouldn't see him the way I was starting to see him. Because deep down, I didn't want to be the reason they hurt. I didn't want to be the one who turned them against him. But here's the thing, it wasn't me, it was him. It was his actions, his choices. And by May, I started to finally let that sink in. I remember one night, it was after another one of those back and forth conversations about the kids. And I could feel myself getting worked up again, trying to reason, trying to keep things peaceful. And I just stopped mid-sentence and said, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fixing this. Whatever happens between you and the boys now, that's on you. And the second I said it, I felt this strange mix of relief and grief. Relief because I finally said out loud what I'd been feeling for months. Grief because I knew what it meant. I was really letting go. Letting go of trying to fix everything meant accepting that my kids might have to go through things I couldn't protect them from. It meant sitting with their pain instead of trying to erase it. It meant letting them have their own experiences, even the hard ones. And that's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a mom, because it's in our nature to shield them, to soften the edges, to make things better. But sometimes the only way they learn, the only way they heal is by feeling it. I started seeing how often I jumped in to rescue everyone, even him in some ways. Every time I explained away his behavior, every time I told the boys he loves you, he's just struggling, I was keeping him safe from accountability, and I was keeping myself stuck in the role of the fixer, the middleman between everyone's emotions. But I was tired, so tired. I realized that every time I tried to fix things, I was taking on pain that wasn't mine. I was carrying the emotional weight of his choices and their reactions, and it was destroying me slowly. The guilt, the pressure, the constant balancing act of being the understanding one, the strong one, the calm one. So I stopped. Not overnight, but slowly. Each time a situation came up, I took a breath instead of stepping in. When the boys came to me upset about something he said or did, I listened, but I didn't defend him. I just said, "You have every right to feel that way." And that became my new way of showing up for them, not fixing it, but feeling it with them. And it wasn't easy. There were moments I'd walk away and cry because it hurt to watch them hurt. But it also felt honest. It felt real. It felt like the start of healing, not just for them, but for me. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bending or covering or spinning things to make everyone else okay. I was finally letting the truth be what it was. By May, I started understanding that love doesn't always mean fixing. Sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes love means letting people sit in the consequences of their actions, even if that person is someone you used to love. And sometimes love means giving your kids space to see the truth for themselves, even when it breaks your heart. I think that's when I started to find a new kind of peace, not the kind that comes from everything being okay, but the kind that comes from knowing I don't have to hold it all together anymore. Letting go of fixing everything didn't mean I stopped caring. It just meant I finally started caring for myself too. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like freedom. Finding strength in the chaos. When I look back on May 2024, I see it as the month that broke me open. Not in the way heartbreak does, that had already happened. This was different. This was the kind of breaking that strips away what's left of the old you so that something stronger can finally take root. I had spent months trying to survive it all, the divorce, the chaos, the co-parenting, the constant emotional push and pull. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I realized that strength doesn't always look like holding everything together. Sometimes it looks like falling apart and still showing up anyway. May was messy. It was draining. It was full of moments that tested me in ways I didn't think I could handle. But it was also the month I finally started to recognize who I was becoming. The woman who was no longer begging for peace, she was creating it. The woman who wasn't searching for validation, she was finding it within herself. There were nights I'd sit in bed replaying everything in my mind, the things he'd said, the choices he'd made, the things I'd allowed myself to tolerate for far too long. And instead of crying about it, I started reflecting on it. I started asking different questions, not why did he do this to me, but why did I keep trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved? Not what's wrong with me, but what have I learned from this? And the answers hurt, but they also healed because they showed me that even in the chaos, I was growing. There's something powerful about realizing you no longer have to prove your worth to anyone, that you don't need an apology to move forward. That closure doesn't come from someone else doing right by you. It comes from finally doing right by yourself. I had spent so long trying to make sense of why he didn't care, why he didn't protect our kids' hearts, why he could move on so quickly. But May was the month I stopped trying to understand it, because some things you'll never understand. And maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe some people aren't meant to give you answers. They're meant to give you lessons, and he did. He taught me what it looks like when love becomes one-sided. He taught me how painful it is to carry a relationship by yourself, but he also taught me what I'll never settle for again. By the end of May, I started seeing small glimpses of peace, not because things got easier, but because I did. I started finding comfort in the quiet again, in my morning walks, in journaling late at night with the windows open, in hearing my boys laughing in another room, in knowing that even after everything, our home still had love in it, real, safe, healing love. I remember writing in my journal one night, "You abandoned me when I needed you most, but I found myself in the wreckage you left behind. You thought you broke me, but really you just woke me up." And that's exactly what May felt like. A wake-up call, not just to who he was, but to who I am. Because I've learned that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the ability to keep going through it, to keep showing up, to keep loving, to keep believing that there's more for you on the other side of the chaos. And now, when I think of that month, I don't just see the tears and the tension. I see strength. I see growth. I see the beginning of a version of me that doesn't chase love. She embodies it. She lives it. She gives it freely to her kids, to her future, to herself. May 2024 was the month I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. It was the month I became my own rescue. Thank you for being here with me today, for sitting in this space and sharing this piece of my story. If you're in that season right now, the one where it feels like everything is falling apart, where you're exhausted from fixing and holding on, please hear me when I say this. You don't have to fix it all. You don't have to hold it all together. You don't have to carry everyone else's pain to be worthy of love. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let go and trust that what's meant for you will rise from the pieces. If this episode spoke to you, please take a moment to share it with another mom who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss next week's episode, where we'll dive even deeper into what healing looks like when the dust finally starts to settle. And as always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.